Hello and good afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. Welcome to the Leadership and Upward Mobility at HBCUs Toward Radical Imagination. My name is Ida Jones. I'm the Associate Director of Special Collections and University Archivist at Morgan State University, and I'm moderating today's session. Before I introduce each panelist, I'd like to remind the attendees we'll be following the Digital Library Federation Code of Conduct, which we'll place in the chat. Audience members, if you have any questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function found at the bottom center of your screen in the Zoom app, and feel free to chat with one another using the chat function. But I think it was disabled, so I'm not sure if we can do that, but I'm reading my script. And we will turn to the Q&A 40 minutes into this session. And now I'd like to introduce our panelist speakers by name, title, and organization. Their full bios are available on the speakers page if you choose to go in a granular level. First, we have Dr. Kimberley Bugg, who's the Associate Library Director, Atlanta University Center, Woodruff Library. Soon to join us is Dr. Dana Chandler, University Archivist of Tuskegee University. Then we have Dr. Flavia Eldemire, who is the Associate VP for Counseling and Placement at Allen University, and she's followed by Dr. Kenvi Phillips, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, University Library at Brown. My opening question for the panelists, in the order in which I've read their names: could you please share your career journey and aspirations for leadership within the HBCU information profession? So Dr. Bugg, I'd like to start with you. Can you explain how you came to this field, what your training was, the mentoring and the funding you received to arrive where you are?
Thank you for having me today. I am really excited to be joining in this conversation. So I actually am the Associate Library Director of Woodruff Library, but I actually began my career here. So this is my first academic library position. I went to North Carolina Central University to get my library degree, and they really did an excellent job of shining a light on what it is to have impact in an African-American HBCU environment. And so I was really excited about that. And so I had tried I thought I would be a public librarian, and I had tried to get into that. And then I quickly shifted to this. And so I have had the wonderful opportunity of kind of looking at what it means to serve people who, I am from Virginia originally. So I went to, elementary and middle school in Virginia, and I had not seen many people that look like me, right? And so the opportunity to help train doctors and lawyers and teachers who will one day go out and be able to be in my son's classroom, for example, is really exciting. So I've received funding in a myriad of ways, mainly through grants and fellowships. I've been really successful at kind of pursuing them. I think, one thing I can say really helped me at Woodruff is that Mrs. Parham, the library director, who was the library director when I came the first time, she's very good at helping with a mentor schedule, really plotting out a path forward to whatever someone is interested in. So when I said I wanted to do leadership, there was opportunities. When I was early in my career, the HBCU Library Alliance had a leadership program, which you could take sessions and webinars at little or no cost. So that was also helpful.
Thank you for that. Dr. Chandler, if you could as well, I think you might have heard the question about academic training and mentoring and how you came into the field in the HBCU world.
I have a very convoluted route. I'm the University Archivist here at Tuskegee University. I've been the university's archivist for 20 years, receiving my graduate degrees from Auburn University. I am originally a civil engineer. That's my first degree. And so I came into the field quite a different route than most people. I have done research all over the world in a variety of archives. And what I've done over the years at Tuskegee is try to work with students and develop interns so that they could come into Tuskegee and develop, because I attend a lot of national meetings, I see a definite lack of African-American students that are in the field of archival research or archival studies. And so I have taken it upon myself to develop interns that can come in and work to become archivists in other places. And I've placed them in some pretty neat places around the world, around the country. I had one student come in and then as an undergraduate, graduated from Auburn and then went on to Queen's University in Ireland with a full scholarship to become a digital archivist. The digital archivist for the state of North Carolina, the digital archivist for the state of Alaska are both interns from our program. There is a preservationist, he's an architect in Florida for a private company who worked as an intern at Tuskegee University Archives. And now he's one of the preeminent preservationists in the state of Florida. Just to name a few, and we've sent several on to the Alabama Department of Archives and History. So we have a long history of working to develop students to become leaders in the field, not just archivists, but leaders in the field.
Thank you for that. Dr. Eldemire?
Yes, so my, Dr. Flavia Eldemire, so as you can see, it says the Associate Vice President for Counseling and Placement. I am a psychologist. I've been working alongside the HBCU Library Alliance with Dr. Sandra Phoenix. So I'm not a librarian, but I train leaders in leadership development, and particularly with HBCU Library Alliance. I've created numerous leadership development programs. Some of the in the audience may have participated in some of those programs. And I have a great love for libraries. And so when I did my first consulting project back in 2008, I just fell in love. I really love the mission of the HBCU Library Alliance. And so I've been a close partner. And so I've served on the board, I've trained the board of the HBCU Library Alliance, but also helped Dr. Phoenix or Ms. Phoenix lead and create and shape the HBCU Library Alliance to what it is today. And so the programming, the initiatives around leadership, we're particularly interested in self-leadership, but leadership as a whole. And so when you think about being a librarian or in the field of librarianship, at the core, you're still a leader. And how do you take your basic, fundamental, everyday, who you are and bring that to the world of work and the work that you do? We know that in our libraries, we serve students from a wide range, faculty from a diverse range as well. And so being your best self is what we're really particularly interested in. And so all of our programming, as Dr. Phoenix or Ms. Phoenix brings it to the forefront, is around shaping and providing the very best programming to the librarians that we can possibly provide. We also know that leadership training is very expensive outside of your traditional domain. And so she's very active in writing grants. And so I help her and I read those things and make sure that we're giving the participants the very best we can, exemplifying the best in leadership. I continue to read and to study. And so I have a real great love for the work that you do, the value of the work that you do, and its impact. And so that's my sort of rolled into, and it's been about over 15 years or more.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips.
Yes.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. And I will echo my excitement for this conversation and for this overall conference, and just really honored to be part of this particular conversation and the overall conversation that we've been having yesterday and today. And like Dr. Chandler, I'm a little bit convoluted to getting to libraries, but also not really. I received a master's and a PhD in U.S. history at Howard University, and then worked in a variety of fields in public history, museums, historic preservation, libraries, and archives. Before arriving at Brown, I was at Harvard University, as well as working at the Moreland Spingarn Research Center at Howard University. And it was there that I found, as a graduate, as well as an employee and a researcher, a kind of love for this institution that was doing this great great work, and also building on legacy and building on history that others had done before us. I had the great pleasure of being mentored by Dr. Elizabeth Clark-Lewis, who is the director of the Public History Program at Howard University's History Department, the founder and director of that program, where there's a large cohort of us coming out of that program who are dedicated to this work, and also to making sure that the history that scholars are distilling we're able to get it to the public, get it to generations of individuals to come behind us, as well as doing that good work. And so we'll see us in various parts of the GLAM fields. And so in this moment, I've kind of lost your question, Dr. Jones, but one of the ways that I did fall into or arrive in DEI work is my commitment to creating relationships and partnerships so that we can both make this history and make materials accessible, as well as preserve them for future generations. And so all about building relationships and creating safe space and creating space and opportunity for us to explore the histories and stories and experiences of those who are coming behind us, and also the contemporary issues that are happening in our field and in our society. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. This is actually very good. Although it started alphabetically by surname, it actually kind of leads into this rather large slope, because we have only one person who intentionally went to library school and intentionally sought to be an information professional. So I think that's very interesting, because it then ties into how what Dr. Chandler is saying, what Dr. Eldemire is saying, and you, Dr. Phillips, about how you find this field after the fact. And because our early session with Dr. Matthews talked about not being able to attend professional meetings because they're cost ineffective. SAAs, ALA, their membership fees alone are very prohibitive for people to attend these organizational meetings, and then even graduate school, to attend graduate school, when most African Americans are coming out of undergrad with some hefty bills. So how do we nurture the idea of coming into the field, not as leaders, but just simply coming into the field? And then when we face the HBCU culture, that there is a ceiling, that most people don't get the chance to tenure and promotion if you're non-faculty. And when you're a professional staff person, you hit a mark and then you stay there. And then some people kind of just bloviate and just stay there and grow rather expansive because they can't leave because they have the institutional memory, or they can't leave because they love what they're doing, or whatever connections are there. And then there's no room to grow. So as a result, you find a top-heavy workforce that is now, I guess, retiring or simply passing on the mantle to another generation that don't really have the institutional memory or have the understanding that there's not much movement here. And we know that in our field, this is eventually going to end in the question, just kind of giving context. How do we make this field appealing? And then how do we make it appealing for institutions that are fraught economically, who then take those of us on the periphery and cut us first, whether it's our space, our budget, our staffing. The archives and libraries are greatly undernourished, under-facilitated places, both in human and fiscal resources. How do you attract people of color who are already burdened with realities of budget, sometimes first generation or second generation, that they have to make a job with a certain income to say, I'm going to live Spartan for the next 4 years, 5 years, to possibly get a job that can pay me a livable wage, to possibly migrate to leadership in the next 15 years? How does that sound to someone who's rather desperate at the outset? How do we bridge that gap? I know that ALA has a program on diversity, SAA has a program on diversity. I see you, Dr. Eldemire, I see your fingers. I'm going to get to you first, and then I'll swing down to Dr. Chandler, Dr. Bugg, and Dr. Phillips. Go ahead, dear.
So I think like at a university level, even just having pamphlets, or even for librarians to even offer a day around career development, what would the field look like? So I work on the career services side, and as you were talking, I'm like, well, we've never had a day where I just did a webinar like, what is the life? How do you become a librarian? What are the various roles? What are the career paths? So that could be something, and I'll talk to Sandra about, Ms. Phoenix about how do we, maybe we can create some webinars around what does it mean to become a librarian? How do you be the keeper of history at your universities? Or, just early exposure, those early internships that we're providing as well, those are good, but also just early awareness. What does this mean? And it's a career path. oftentimes it's later on that a student may think about becoming a librarian, but I think we can create some pathways early on. And I also talked with Jennifer about this as well, but I haven't seen one webinar, and I've been doing this for a long time, that says, how do you become a librarian?
Thank you for that. So to Dana's point about coming out of civil engineering, that's where I'm trying to harvest students in other disciplines
Yes.
to come into this field. So Dana, can you talk about that in terms of what your solution might be? I apologize. Can you use first names? I know.
Yes, but by all means, please.
Mhm.
You know, so I came into my field because of my daughter requesting me to stay at home. I was on the road all the time, and so she wanted me at home. She said, "Daddy, I need you at home." And I had actually interned myself in grad school at Tuskegee for a while, and the job came open, and it had been open for a while for a 2-year appointment and under a grant. And I took that and parlayed that into a full-time position, because I went in there and with the notion to not only do the project that was assigned to me, but also to take it to the next level, clean the archives up, organize the archives as best I could at the time. And 20 years later, I've still got work to do. But in the process, I was able to utilize students, not only work study students, but I genuinely went after students, not only in the history department, English department, architecture. I've got one student right now who's in the building science department, who loves what he's doing. And I want to say this, that early on, I decided that instead of sending things out to be done, and specifically with digitization, because we've got students that are tactile learners, they're visual learners, they're not auditory learners. And the more hands-on you can give them, the better it is. So I actively sought out working with other professors to develop a pathway for my students to come in and work with me. I interviewed them. And then after the interview process, I got the same statement from all of them. I did not know that we had an archive, and I don't know what it is. And that's true, I found out, in a lot of HBCUs. Here at Tuskegee, we have helped 6 different archives develop their archives in amongst HBCUs. Everybody from Hines Community College, which used to be Utica, to the Voting Rights Institute in Selma, to the Voorhees College, just to name a few that we've helped, and several within Alabama itself. And all of that to find out that very few were led by genuine archivists. These were often led by people that were concerned about the history of the HBCU. And over the years, thanks again to Sandra Phoenix and the Library Alliance, I'm going to use them a lot too, because I love that organization. I really do. I think every HBCU should be a part of it. But because of interaction with the student population, being involved with the freshman experience, making the archives and the library a stop on the freshman experience. They have to come visit me. They have, and I pick out items and I show them, and I give them excitement. I build in them a desire to know more. And when you do that, you actually end up making the students aware of the position, aware of the need for more archivists from HBCUs for HBCUs. And because, like you said, we are top heavy right now. You know, my generation, we're about to retire. And I've got 2 right now that are from FAMU. I am excited about them. They're both of them. The possibility of them being great archivists is certainly there. So it's a matter of showing excitement to our students and letting them know that, hey, this is a viable opportunity for you. I get carried away, and I'm sorry. I'll turn it over to somebody else.
So I'll jump in and add that I agree. I think we have a huge funding issue, right? And for me, whenever I'm thinking about funding or how to recruit new librarians, it is always what comes first, the chicken or the egg kind of scenario for me. But what I was thinking that when Ida was talking earlier, that it's local. I think, money is important. You certainly have to pay your bills. And, when I think about Maslow's hierarchy, it's hard to be creative and innovative when you're worried about if you're going to pay your bills. But I think it's local. I think, it's about conveying a value system. I think this is a good time because I do think all libraries, not HBCU libraries especially, but all libraries is at this kind of personnel crisis. And we're having to think differently about how to recruit, the information professionals that are being graduated today, whether digital or not, they could essentially get a job at Google or Facebook, right? So why would they come work for us? And so I think we have to think about their value system. I think we have to have them think about us early. We're inundated with Google from a very early age. And although I've only ever been a librarian, I didn't graduate undergrad thinking I would be a librarian, right? I was thinking of law, and it was at a law internship that someone said, have you ever thought about librarianship? And certainly I've been to the library, but I hadn't ever thought about that as a career and what that impact could be. We have been very good at Woodruff Library of thinking about this. Many years ago, we had a Mellon grant that focused on introducing undergraduate students to the field of librarianship and archives. And, Derek Mosley participated in that program. Some others participated in that program. And every single time we have a very strong commitment to this. Every single time we apply for any type of grant, and we do a lot of grant work where I work, we put in there a graduate assistant, from Clark Atlanta's African American Studies program, or, other library science programs around. So we're really trying to introduce people early. And I think that is going to be the key, is really trying to have them know about us sooner to Dana's point. So I think that is it. We can't pay them what Google can pay them, but I still believe that humans are motivated by more than just money. And so figuring out, I think the challenge is, though, we've operated in one way for so long that we're not taking the time to invest in the time to figure out what motivates them and how to appeal to that. And that's going to require that libraries change a little, right? That, that we hire people who don't come in 5 days a week, that type of thing. And that change, is radical in some ways, even though, we understand and we see it, it's certainly difficult to move in that direction.
Thank you for that. Kenvi?
Yeah, I would echo what everybody has already said, and add and emphasize, the idea of speaking to youth early, right? So and also leveraging partnerships. So are we talking and partnering with our public libraries? Are we partnering with YMCAs, YWCAs, where young people are going? The idea of, I didn't find out what an archive was until I was, already in college, why are we not, or how can we reach children when they're still thinking about being, well, I don't know what they're thinking about being now. We were kids like firefighters and police officers and doctors, like that was it. Why not add a librarian? Because are you engaging with those individuals? And also as Kimberley said, or Kim said just a few moments ago, like the power of what it is that we do in as information professionals. One of the first times where I felt and understood the power of an archive and archivist was when I was working at the Anheuser-Busch brewery in St. Louis, which is where I'm from, as a tour guide. And I got to meet the company archivist, which was an individual who was an employee of the company, who was just in love with Anheuser-Busch. And so he saved and found and collected all of their history. And one day the company was in legal trouble and they needed him to get them out of this legal dispute that they were having with another brewery in another country in terms of naming and the rights to the name. And he was able to bail out Anheuser-Busch because of his hobby. And of course, they made that into an official position for him, and then paid him to be able to do the thing that he loved, which saved that company a great deal of money. And so it's like, wait, this multi-billion, million-dollar company that everybody knows, this is what this person did. And he essentially saved this company, this family legacy. And like that type of story are things that we can tell, like in terms of what is it that you do and why is it important? An individual level in terms of us as, you know, in terms of how I feel about myself as a Black person or as a woman navigating life, those are big, but also there's the business side, there's the financial side, and maybe you don't get the Google, Microsoft check, but you can still have that same kind of impact. And maybe you do get that kind of check when you turn and partner with a Google or a Microsoft to work within your HBCU library and or archive. So there's lots of opportunity and lots of possibility. And I like what Dana said, and also what Dr. Parham said yesterday, is like, we have to think outside of the box. I don't have a library degree, but I did study museums and archives at Howard. So maybe we don't talk about that strict, do you have the MLIS? Maybe you don't, but do you have the experience? Do you have the passion and the willingness to go get the know-how so that you can actually do the work?
Yes, Dana, I see your hand.
I want to piggyback off of what Dr. Phillips said.
Kenvi
said, I want to piggyback off of what she said. She's talking about building partnerships, okay? Now, y'all may not be aware of it, but I'm going to hold up where I'm at. I'm in Sandestin this week at a meeting convened by the Museum of African American History and Culture. We're one of 5 schools. We have a $750,000 grant from them. It'll parlay into about $1 million when it's all over with. How did we do that? That's the question. You know, we've had to support ourselves. My budget at Tuskegee, my annual budget is this. They pay for my salaries. We've had to come up with creative ways to get supplies, thanks to the HBCU Library Alliance and Mellon grants and IMLS and other grants that we've gotten over the years. And I've had to write a lot of grants over the years. But what I did was I parlayed our resources that we have at Tuskegee. HBCUs, we have resources that others don't have, that PWIs don't have. We've got to take advantage of that situation. Start really pushing it. And so I early on reached out to the Smithsonian. They came down, they used a lot of our photographs at the new Museum of African American History and Culture. And we've worked with them, and it's ended up leading us in a direction, and working with the Library Alliance, to being one of the top digitization schools. Now, notice I didn't say HBCU. I said digitization schools in the Southeast. And we teach other schools, including PWIs, how to use equipment to digitize. We started out with nothing, but we decided that we were going to start doing the work ourselves rather than sending it out for others to use and others to benefit from. And so we ended up parlaying that into a situation where it placed us in a position to be a partner with the Smithsonian and to receive that kind of funding. Now, where I was hurting, I pointed out, you know, it was just me and my assistant for many years. And now I've got 2 archivists that work under me, 2 more interns, and another intern to come in the summer. And all because of parlaying what we have at Tuskegee into something that others want, and telling them, you don't just want it, you need what we have. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to be positive. And another thing I'm going to say, in all honesty, y'all, we've been screwed over the years, HBCUs have, by countless individuals. They've taken advantage of us. We need to stop that. We need to put a hold on what we have and start working to maintain what is ours and utilize it for the benefit of the community.
I love that. Great advocacy there. There was a question in the chat about the idea of going to high schools with the idea. Rashawn McGuffey says that she knew in high school she wanted to be a librarian. So she was asking the question, do you think librarians or MLIS programs should participate in career days at high school and perhaps have students learn about that? So I think we've answered that question, but I would also chime in that in Washington, D.C., with the Girl Scouts would come with History Day to the Smithsonian Archives where I was. And actually, we created little boxes for them to have these projects in to kind of have that tactile experience. Of course, COVID and other kinds of budgetary restraints have precluded a lot of that programming, but as Dana has pointed out, necessity is the mother of invention. And we all know in HBCU worlds, we're the most inventive and necessity people. So we tend to have that creativity in our DNA. As we kind of round out another 10 minutes before we open the room for question and answers, if you could wave a magic wand in regards to representation in the field, in regards to diversity, what aspect would you see if Bill Gates or LeBron James could fund one stream of this? What kinds of funds would you put towards recruitment and retention, as well as our initial conversations, upward mobility in the field within the institution? So I don't know who wants to start first with that, but if you could kind of have this imaginary open checkbook to be able to fund a national endeavor, what would that look like, and how would you ask the benefactor to channel those funds or to raise that consciousness, so we can even start to think in some kind of Afrofuturistic way that we might be able to cobble together this solution with not only hopes and intentions, but an idea of succession planning, which ties into upward mobility. We need to really have strategic conversations about succession planning and upward mobility. So all of that mixed together, the question would be, if you could address one of the needs in terms of retention, recruitment, and elevation or mobility, what would that look like, and how would you envision that to be manifested?
I think I can start. One of the areas where I feel we could certainly use more representation, and I'm specifically thinking about people who come from non-white populations, is in metadata. As we think about as a country on some days, and as a profession, about the language that we use and how deeply that system is embedded in everything we do, from organization to selection to display and preview. We need more people who understand it differently involved in that work. And, cataloging is a little bit, it's a bit of a dying art, if you will. So we are losing that. At the same time, we're needing to have a really strong metadata infrastructure, from OCLC to Library of Congress, everyone. And when you get into those environments, they are often very monochromatic. So we need to do a lot of work of recruiting people who understand, who not just understand, but also can relate to how a term might impact a user, or while forgetting a term might leave a particular group out, or might cause a resource to not be matched. And so trying to build that pipeline from the ground up is where I really think that one of the areas that libraries really need to focus on building a lot more diversity. From a funding perspective, I think no matter the position, but all the positions, there should be a little bit more support for the onboarding process. Being able to move, break leases, take your items across country, affording a visit to come look at a new place, all of that is quite expensive. And I think that should be part of a package when we start to think about, these things. Oftentimes these, as we say, we're competing with the Googles and Facebooks, their salaries are comparable, right? But the benefits often are where we get lost. So if we could at least think about how to support a person from conception. When I start to recruit you, to Flavia's point earlier, right? There should be a little bit more conversation at the beginning about, you apply, but you can also have a sneak peek, right? I've seen some libraries are starting to do these Q&As beforehand, right? But really the library is thinking about, I'm gaining something and I'm giving something, rather than, it's just all on the person that's coming in. So really my funding would be around supporting the onboarding, but also growing the pipeline for people of color in the metadata round.
Thank you for that. I know the archives are doing that with restorative justice in repairs of finding aids, so reparative justice. Anyone else? Dana?
I want to address that metadata aspect that she just talked about. I want y'all all to think about this seriously. The metadata schema that's currently used in archives was developed by PWIs. We need a black metadata. And that can be developed by people in English. You know, we're talking about, you know, IMLS, getting your MLS degree, but if you think about it for just a minute, we can use a lot of different undergraduate degrees that can aid us in doing the things that we need to do. We need people that can take and develop this black metadata. I've been pushing for that for years. We need that. It's just not there. I mean, when you're starting to develop a finding aid and you're using the tired, worn out metadata schemas that are developed by the PWIs, sometimes it just doesn't fit what we're doing.
Mhm.
Also, I think, you know, like the engineering and the architecture folks, the digitization, actually processing a collection and writing a finding aid. Oh, hey, you know, that's drudgery too. But having them digitize that and putting it on a website or putting it on Facebook or some other social media platform, it opens up the world for their imaginations, and selling their imaginations to the job is a big part of that.
I like that. Kimberly, did you want to go ahead? Okay. I was saying, I had like 4 key areas. One was around enhancing or providing more funding for leadership development across the board, because the programming we've been able to do is like maybe 24 at a time, or 12 or 6. And so we've been doing, it's growing, but we need like a big investment in training and development to give everyone the confidence and the security to know that they have a voice, they have impact on the universities, not only just the university, the communities at large. I think of investment in training and technology, technological enhancements, marketing the value of HBCUs as a whole, the libraries, and because those are the core of, you have no universities without that library. It's the nucleus, you know, and then upgrading spaces, right? Because most of the schools are historical universities, it's important that we, you know, have some modernization internally. Well, I know that a lot of the buildings are on the historic registries or very historic, so there's a whole lot of, I've learned through construction that there's a lot of which you can't do to the building outside, but you can do some things inside. So helping the libraries to modernize, you know, grants specifically for making spaces where even the kids can do their, plug in their iPods and iPads, and right now they come with 6, 7 different gadgets. You know, that whole technological infrastructure needs to, I mean, that's where, you know, when you talk about these Googles and all the bigger companies, that could be a partnership that they could do to help enhance. So Kenvi, I see you laughing, so smiling over there. You want to join in?
Absolutely. I completely, again, agree with what my co-panelists have said. And I would add, in terms of succession, retention, that training piece, and the upward mobility piece, like it. And it's not just the HBCUs. You're not going to get training for work that they don't want you to do. They're not training you for your next job, but there should be an opportunity for you to get an education, a training, an opportunity to work and stretch and expand and grow and develop as a professional. So when you go into a position, is there a mentor? Is there someone to guide you, to help you understand what your next move should be, not just for your own personal development, but for the development and the progression of the institution? It does not serve the institution for all of the people to never learn and never stretch and never grow. And you came in at this position, in 15 years, you're still at this position. So that doesn't serve the institution. So we, as institutions, we have to recognize that we have to help the individual grow and progress in their career so that they can move the institution forward as well. And so all of these things that we've said, so where's the money go? Everywhere. Like, we need bigger budgets. Like, we just simply need more money. And I'm saying that sitting at an Ivy, right? We need more money. And I would also like to add, you can advocate for HBCUs wherever you are. I worked at Howard, I've been at Howard, and I left Howard an institution ago, and I still am committed to advocating for HBCUs. I'm still committed to ethical and partnerships. I'm still committed to doing the work of preserving the Africana experience and making it accessible. And I'm also always trying to direct folks back to HBCUs, trying to make sure that as we enter into these agreements, as we enter into these, oh, you know, they're actually already doing that down there. We need to talk to them. So, you can do this work and still have a passion, even if you're not physically at an HBCU.
Very good. So now Jerome offered to ask the question, how do we address the following? The attrition issues in the profession and having honest conversations about the great gender imbalance in the profession. The lack of men of color in this profession is definably noticed, or definitely noticed, but not often discussed. Any observations if we have one man in the room? I don't know if you want to address that, Dana, or anybody else would like to address that.
I would like to address that. I have noticed that when you go to SAA, you know, it's like, I don't know, 100 to 1, you know, women to men. And I noticed that when working with my colleagues at the University of Alabama and their School of Library Sciences, I've noticed that the majority of the students that I talk to when I go up there to work with them, it's girls and women. So how do we address that issue? We've got to make it clear to young men that there is an opportunity to actually show the accomplishments of Tuskegee or whatever HBCU in a light that is a little bit different than what maybe a young lady might bring to it. Gender issues, of course, right now are a big deal, and I realize that. But for young men, we have a young man now that's working under me as an archivist, and I've got great hopes for him. He's very conscious of the fact, though, that he's in the minority when it comes to archivists. And he realizes that what I'm looking for is not what my colleague, who is a female, she works under me too, what she's looking for. And what he's looking for is to bring about understanding of how young Black men were instrumental in developing a lot of the things in these HBCUs. So yeah, we need to do something to try to entice them. I enticed him with digitization. That seems to be the thing right now. You know, it has hands-on work. That's what they're looking for.
Thank you for that. We still have the Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat. We have a comment, I believe, from Delrisha White. Yes, upgrading modernization is so important. I did not know. I did not want to use the library in undergrad. The temperature was not well regulated, and in general, it didn't feel like a place I wanted to study. Imagine how much time to engage with the library is lost just because of the environment. And I appreciate Flavia's point of view. So that, I think, is more of a comment as I sit in a building that has no air as well, because it's not, quote, timed to be on, but there's no heat either. But we're in here effervescing in the library. Nevertheless, so that's a real point. Laura Street has not a question, but a comment about metadata. I would encourage folks to check out Wikidata, at least as an alternative to the largely white and male LC name authority file. The ability to describe and provide access to the work of individuals important to your institution without the gatekeeping of LC helps make makes larger historical connections and themes more visible. Any insight about that from our panelists? Okay, I know that there is an actual renaming going on at the Library of Congress, a colleague of mine, so they're actually changing their cataloging protocol, which is going to make things harder to find, because in sort of a shelf reading, that's why I'm going to be going to library school. I want to understand the science of all this, where E185, and we all know what that is, you can kind of shelf read all of that. But the way they're now changing it up, it's not going to be as linear in terms of finding aggregate books together by a particular theme. They're going to change the way in which they're doing it. So now you have to kind of see 3 books here, 4 books here under various subcategories. So there is this kind of movement afoot that's going to make it much harder for people who are not informationally literate to find certain things or just happen upon things. So in the midst of the information age that we're in and going to, information is becoming harder to find. So as we look at the idea of bringing professionals in or training, succession, or what have you, we really need to think of our computer people or those who are gifted in science to really consider the field, because the technology is creating another language barrier. As literacy was in the 19th century, the idea of technical literacy is the new kind of hurdle to overcome. Any thoughts or comments on that?
I'd like to make one point, if I may. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take over, but I have noticed some things about that. You know, when I was in grad school, one of the things I would do is I would look in the card catalog, I'd find a book, and then I'd go up the stacks and I'd look on the stacks, and hey, guess what? There's a book beside there that's serendipity of it all. There's a book beside it that's even more important than the one that I was looking for, but I didn't know about it. HBCU libraries are unique in that we still have books in our libraries. Seriously. You know, I go to Auburn University's library. Where's most of your books? Well, we've got them off-site. You have to call it up. You can't go browse the stacks anymore. You can at Tuskegee. And so I'm finding that we have a very important role to play, especially with my students, and I send them out and do research questions. They go to the library and if, oh, I found this other book, you know, you recommended this. Okay. And I'm glad you found it, but they found it because they went and browsed the stacks. So we have a lot going for us, you know, even though we may be behind the times a little bit, I think that's a good thing.
I actually love and appreciate that comment, Dana. Like, I think about, you know, the value of HBCUs. There's a lot of like, oh, how do we compete? How do we deal as HBCUs? And I think the answer is you don't. Like, you do what you do well. There's something very special about HBCUs and how they operate. And there's variety within HBCUs. So like what you do at Tuskegee, they're not doing at Fisk, they're not doing at Spelman, they're not. So what is it that we do well here? Let's lean into that and make sure that that thing is at the top of our list as we're selling ourselves, as we're marketing ourselves, as we're making sure that people know this is who we are and this is why we're special. No, we can't do what they do at Brown or Harvard or whatever, but we do this and they can't do this. And so that's why you're here. And I think that that's important. And I want to go back to Jerome's comment about the gender disparity and how do we deal with that attrition. And, you know, I know Jerome is in DEI, like I'm in DEI right now, and that our job is to create safe space. And our job is to make sure that we're changing policy, we're changing practices to be more inclusive and to be more thoughtful about how we engage with our different populations. Because again, a lot of times we think about HBCUs in a monolith and they're not. Right. So there are things that some places do well, others don't. There's some things that we're all Black, but how there are some differences there. Right. And so how do we make sure that we are being inclusive in our practices and our policies? How do we make sure that we're reaching out as we're marketing and as we're talking about what we do well? And yeah, we're being honest about what we don't, but we're working on those things. And so creating that safe space. And so supporting, I think there is a group of Black male librarians, like I absolutely support that group. I don't know how you get in contact with that group. I'm not part of that group, but I absolutely support them when and how I can, because their work is really important to make sure that we have that gender diversity in our field.
I think it also goes back to that early career awareness. Again, you know, creating these, this is a new idea, but you know, like the day in the life of a librarian or career path. I read a lot of material and I see, but I don't see information or webinars or seminars just for even just Zoom meetings on, have you ever thought about becoming a librarian, right? So right now in the space of higher ed, a lot of African-American men are going into sports management. I mean, like at a record number, 200, 300, 400 at a time. But when you talk to them, like to even talk about the history of, you know, like having a librarian come to one of those classes, because those are heavy classes where you can have a big audience to talk about, have you ever considered a career as a librarian, take in what they know as a subject matter, because that's where most of them are trying to do something in sports, and tie it to how you can make this a career path. You know, maybe studying or looking, you know, around the history, preserving, you know, so they're just, I mean, making those pathways or bridging, but getting into inside of classes early on to talk to particularly those heavy male-based classes at all of our universities. Again, it's in sports management, that's where they're heavily moving. And then I think even with the IT side, you know, if you look at technology and librarianship, that's another pathway too. The technology piece behind it, digitalization. So I think librarians we may have to create a day where we go into the classrooms for a day, or put it in first year seminars, or create materials, but something around marketing the life and what it means to be a librarian, and having African Americans on those, males on those brochures or in those, leading those discussions, why you should consider becoming a librarian, I think would be helpful.
Thank you for that. We have three comments in the chat that I want to get to. Leah Osborne said, piggybacking on Laura's comment about Wikidata, she would like to suggest the Homosaurus for international LGBT plus linked data vocabulary. Dr. Celeste Welsh said the U.S. Government Publishing Office previously worked with Professor Chandler to focus on HBCU libraries with the Federal Depository Library Program. GPO continues to seek to expand public access to digital government information. Next steps include digital preservation of collections ingested by the National Collections of the Government Information Office site. How can partnerships be further developed? And then lastly, Delrisha White, how can HBCUs engage the local community in the history gathering and collected so HBCUs aren't viewed as gatekeeping academic institutions in the community? So the GPO and then the HBCUs. Is anyone interested in either one of those?
So I'll jump in about the HBCU. I think this goes to something that was said earlier. You know, I think we're doing that work. I think we are already doing that work. The problem, I think, often is that, you know, to Flavia's point earlier, we don't have the marketing machine that other universities have. So people don't know as much about what's happening. You know, there's a lot of not true stereotypes that exist about what's happening and what we don't have and all this other kind of things that simply aren't true. And they might have been true at one time, but they're not true anymore, but we're still working to overcome that. So we do a lot in my particular library. We do a lot with the community. We partner with the museums and with the public libraries. You know, we have open crowdsourcing days for the public to come in. We reach out to the people who live in the neighborhoods and ask for their history. You know, we work with Washington High School down the street to help them with their digital projects, but those aren't things that we share as broadly as we can. So I think a lot more of that is happening than is well known.
I have to cut off at this juncture. We have about a minute and a half left. So in closing, I want to thank our panelists and our attendees for their participation, and to check their schedule for other sessions during this two-day event. And of course, they put their information in the chat, as well as their speakers' bios online. So please reach out, and thank you for all the emojis, and have a great conference.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It was good.